Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer briefing on this Thursday afternoon with myself, Liam Bryce, joined by McPartlin to have a look back at Hibs' 3-2 win over Rot-Weiss Essen. First friendly back at Easter Road for David Gray's side, a number of debuts, some interesting team selection, plenty of goals, plenty to dissect from a night back at Easter Road. First of all, as always, folks, just a wee quick word for our sponsor. The Hibs Observer is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Edinburgh and the surrounding area, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so start your search today. So yeah, as I said, Patrick, plenty to talk about from last night's game. Even before we kicked off, the unveiling of the Stanton Stand, Hibs legend, giving an everlasting tribute at Easter Road. We spoke to him a wee bit before the game. There'll be plenty of that coming on our website. And he delivered a match ball for the game as well. A big picture with both teams. It was a nice moment, wasn't it? The unveiling of the Stanton Stand.
It was, yeah, and I think it's been a kind of topic of discussion amongst fans for a number of years now. That apart from the famous five stand, there isn't really a lot to commemorate some of the iconic figures from the club's history. And I think it's fitting in the 150th anniversary year that they are kind of getting around to that. And I think it's a few more deserving than Pat Stanton of having that sort of recognition. I think you saw the video last week when he was kind of told what they were going to be doing, and it was sort of typical kind of understated Pat Stanton. I mean, there's a reason he's called the quiet man, and I think in some ways it was just really nice that his kind of go-to sort of feeling and emotion for that was, I wish my dad could see this. And yeah, I think it's just kind of sums him up, really just sort of understated that his talking on the pitch. But I think, yeah, as you say, a sort of an everlasting kind of silent recognition for him, and just sort of recognising what he gave to the club as a player, as a coach, manager, and ambassador, and now just all round kind of club legend. So a nice way to start, and I think a sort of game fitting of the occasion as well, with plenty of goals and talking points, as you say.
Yeah, as we said, yeah, plenty of goals, plenty of talking points, plenty to look over. So, I mean, the fixture itself, obviously, I think most people will be aware it was a kind of part of the Hibs 150th anniversary celebrations, sort of recreating a fixture from the 1955 European Cup, the first ever edition of what we now know these days as the Champions League, where Hibs played Rot-Weiss Essen over two legs. So the German side now playing the German the German third tier they are these days. Kind of on their way back, and I mean, you could see that a third tier club in Germany. I mean, the support they brought with them last night was over 2,500 fans in the away end. I think if you were out and about through the city, even since not even just yesterday, I think in the kind of several days before, you couldn't have failed to spot the Rot-Weiss Essen fans. They really made themselves at home. Really seemed to enjoy themselves. Especially, I mean, given the noise that they made throughout the game. So I mean, it kind of made it like it almost didn't feel like a preseason. It wasn't a preseason friendly atmosphere, put it that way, and it was enjoyable in that sense. It was something really quite different for a preseason game, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, and I think we obviously understand the importance of preseason games. We understand the importance of the sort of difference in opposition. I think a lot of people saying, what was the point of playing Ajax? But at the end of the day, it's a chance to sort of like really test yourself, and for the coaching staff and the players, it kind of lets you know where you're at in terms of a team and individually. It's probably a bit of a shock to the system, or at least the first half was. But then you look at the previous game before that, the 0-0 draw with Duisburg. That was it was played in sort of 30-degree heat, and it's very much just like minutes in the legs. And I think last night is still minutes in the legs. It's still just trying to get players up to speed. You're still kind of juggling the fact that you've had some players who have had more of a rest than others. Some have been on international duty. You're still kind of manage their minutes. You've got the trip to Bournemouth at the start of next week, and then the friendly against Bolton as well. So there's still sort of games to be played before that Michelin tie, the first leg. I think it's just about making sure your team's sort of peak condition. That you have an idea of the sort of 11 you want to play. It's a chance to try things out. We've seen that with a few different formations over the three games, but as you say, it didn't feel like a friendly. There was no kind of flat atmosphere, or just sort of very much a feeling of essentially being a glorified kickabout. The Essen fans certainly made themselves heard pretty much throughout the 90 minutes, particularly so at the start of the second half when they scored twice in quick succession to kind of get back into it. But I think even just having that sort of like that noisy support behind the goal, it gave it almost that feel of a European tie. At Easter Road, with that, the noise and the colour, and obviously the pyrotechnics beforehand. I think it's probably a good kind of introduction for some of the players who maybe haven't played in Europe or haven't played at Easter Road in big games, just to kind of get a feel for what it's like. You kind of get conditioned to it, and it'll be less of a kind of shock to the system when it does come about. I mean, I know there's a lot of chat like professional footballers, you should be able to deal with this, and this, which is true, but unfamiliar circumstances, surroundings can sometimes sort of take you by surprise. So I think after that last night, there'll be no surprises in Europe, and probably no surprises in the Scottish Premiership either.
No, absolutely. I mean, as you said, it was still about building up people's minutes, but I think maybe the team selection and then how the game panned out in terms of who played what amount of minutes. I think, does it kind of feel safe to say that we are starting to see maybe what David Gray is building towards for that Michelin tie? So, for example, I think you had last night where you had 3 debuts: Raphael Challenger in goal, Josh Mulligan. 3 home debuts, sorry, Josh Mulligan and Jamie McGrath. Challenger played the entire 90 minutes, so you think that's maybe got to, at the moment, is putting him in pole position as being the starter come that European tie. Again, Jordan Smith might get 90 minutes in the next friendly. We'll see what happens, but at the moment, he's kind of mixed night for Challenger. We'll come on to that in a wee minute. You had Mulligan in there. McGrath played 90 minutes as well. You had Kieran Bowie starting up front. Mulligan playing in midfield actually alongside Dylan Levitt. So I mean, it's still about getting minutes in the legs, but you would expect, as that tie is now sort of less than, it's kind of coming up for 2 weeks now. That the team
2 weeks exactly.
2 weeks exactly. Aye. And you kind of suspect that it's maybe starting to take shape now. The manager's going to have something in his mind that he's building towards, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I talked before about there being players who've been on international duty. There've been players who, hadn't, so they've been back a bit longer. But then, just you mentioned McGrath and Bowie there. You've also got players who are probably still coming back after long-term injuries. And I think McGrath was saying it's maybe his first or second 90 minutes in sort of 6 or 7 months. So you've still got him building up. You've still got Bowie building up as well. Still not sure if there's an argument for having Bowie coming off the bench just to have that kind of impact. I think we saw that a lot last season, that when he was coming off the bench sort of like 60-65 minutes, it was kind of something new for the opposition defence to deal with. And I think when you had, I know he wasn't sort of universally popular, but when you had someone like Mikola Kurevic kind of acting a bit as a battering ram for the first hour or so, then that kind of roughed up defences, and then Bowie could come on and kind of pick up where he left off. It just ties into David Gray talking about having those finishers, having people coming on. It's not the 11 that starts, it's not the 11 that finishes, that sort of thing. So I think there's an awful lot of juggling going on. But as you rightly point out, this will be with a view to trying to put out a team that has the best chance of getting a result in Denmark, and then obviously thinking about a team that has the best result of getting the best chance of getting a result at Easter Road. So I think you could see that. I think for me, it was interesting to note that in the previous 2 games, he'd started with a sort of 3-4-1-2. So, very much what he was playing in the second half of last season, that back 3, moving to a kind of back 5 out of possession. But I thought it was interesting, like the previous 2 games, that he did move to playing a more kind of 3-4-2-1, where you had the sort of 2 sort of 10s behind a centre forward. And he started like that last night. And I mean, it's David Gray, it's Hibs, it is very fluid. There's a lot of rotation, but I did think that was quite interesting. That's maybe a little bit of a hint as to what we might see him do, especially with that kind of 5-4-1, defending. I just think, a team like Midtjylland, who are very, very experienced in European competition. They've had some good results against good teams. Kind of just a point off winning the title in Denmark last year. So I think there will be a stern test, but there's no reason why Hibs can't sort of be optimistic that if they can get a result in Denmark, then they'd have a really good chance in the second leg. So I think having that sort of chance to try out a few things, try out a few formations, and think, right, well, that formation worked really well, in this sense, that formation worked well in that sense. Just it's is it going to be the same personnel we saw line up? I don't know. I think it depends on transfer activity. It obviously depends on fitness. It depends on what the coaching staff will take out of last night. Obviously, a couple of knocks as well for like Lewis Miller and Ellie Yuan. So that comes into it as well. But it's you never like to sort of put your neck on the line and say this is definitely what's going to happen. But he has played that kind of 3-4-2-1, a kind of tweaked version of what he played last season, and I think that's, for me, that would make sense. It's a formation that the players will be familiar, or most of the players will be familiar with. It requires marginal tweaks, and as David Gray likes, you can change it up very quickly with just like one sub or one sort of rotation, that kind of thing. So maybe Gray will surprise us all by playing 4-2-3-1 in Denmark. Who knows? But it certainly looks as though there has been a bit more of a concerted effort to try and sort of build something for the first leg.
Yeah. So let's talk about the home debuts, and we'll come to McGrath first, because I think that particularly ties into this change in formation, because I think how he operates and where he's comfortable being is sort of allowed David Gray to make this sort of tweak. He's sort of played in that sort of left-sided 10 role, if you like. He's not kind of playing out wide, but he's tucked in, and then it allows, obviously, you've got Nicky Cadden as a wing back, allows him to provide the width, and it's quite a nice, and on paper I feel that's quite a nice balance. And then out of possession, McGrath, he's comfortable if it's going to say a 4-5-1 or a 5-3-2, he is comfortable either dropping into the 3 in the midfield, or if you need him to go to the left of a 4, he can do all of that. He's a very kind of versatile player, and I think David Gray's actually made a point of saying a couple of times already how sort of tactically switched on he is. He said he's one of those players that you only need to tell him something once. You don't need to repeat yourself, and he'll do it. And I think that's probably, it's quite evident because he is very comfortable switching between different positions in and out of possession. He's a clever player. He picks up good areas, and he's got a real engine on him. Even for a guy who he was saying last night. We'll have an interview with him coming on the website in the very near future. But just as a kind of wee, kind of snippet of that, he sort of mentioned how it's his first 90 minutes for quite a long time. He had kind of injury issues at Aberdeen, but he certainly doesn't look like a player who is building up his fitness. Probably in his head and in his body, he's kind of feeling I've got levels to go here. But when you're watching him, he is sort of, he's perpetual motion, and I've always felt that watching him. Even when he came to Easter Road with Aberdeen last season, he's a guy who's always on the move, whether that's going forward or going back the way. And you saw as well what he can bring in an attacking sense. I mean, it was his second or third touch that he scored with inside the first couple of minutes, and it was just kind of, again, sort of typical of what he can bring. Hibs breaking in behind in the early minutes, and then he sort of timed his run and arrived into the box at the right moment, and he's got the composure to react to his own saved shot and be first to that. So, I mean, were you impressed with him? Were you impressed with just kind of in general so far as to what he can add to the team?
Yeah, I mean, as you point out there, you saw what he's capable of doing with Aberdeen last season, and before that with St Mirren and Dundee United as well. He's one of those players who I think you do always notice him, because he can he can be a bit of a pest, if you like, because he is sort of all over the place. He pops up all over the pitch, and you make a really good point there about those sort of like attacking. What he brings in an attacking sense, and then you've also got that those late runs into the box, which, I mean, we know David Gray loves that. He's talked about that a lot, and I think that especially with Junior Hoilett there, I mean, it's quite kind of scary thinking that Hoilett's not really had a pre-season, and he just kind of strolled through the game last night for like that first 45. Just we know what he's capable of. We know what he can bring, and you can see exactly why the club are so keen to sort of extend his stay. So I think him and McGrath dovetailed really well in that sort of dual 10 role in the first half. And I just think it's the way that McGrath kind of looks like he's been playing in that team for 18 months. It's just, he knows where people are going to be. He knows where to leave space. He knows sort of where to run. And I think that's sort of quite you talked before about him not really needing to be told twice. Not having to teach things like that is really, it's like an added bonus really. And I think he strikes me as the kind of figure who he will get a few of those goals from like those late runs into the box, just sort of timing those runs. We saw it quite a bit as well. Like no matter who it was cutting it back, there were these cutbacks coming from the wingers or the wing backs. It's obviously something that they've been kind of working on. I think there were points last season where the crossing maybe could have been better. Not from Nicky Cadden, of course. That was he's a different case altogether. But just maybe from the right side, I think that was something that could have been strengthened. And I think it's sort of fitting that the goal did come. Jamie McGrath's goal did come from a cutback from the right side. So that'll have been pleasing for Gray to see something like that they've been working on. Produce a goal, and it'll be pleasing for McGrath to have scored so early on at Easter Road in his Hibs career. And as you say, like he's not played an awful lot of football, but doesn't look like it. And I think that's maybe been the problem in previous seasons, as Hibs have signed players who maybe take a bit of time to get up to speed with Scottish football if they come from out with the league, or if they're coming back after an injury, then they sort of take a bit of time to kind of get back to full speed. And it's just about managing that, and it's about putting a team out there who's capable of kind of picking up where where the team left off at the end of last season. And there were a few negatives last night, but I think on the whole it looks promising. And I think McGrath certainly be playing a big part in that. As you say, his flexibility, his ability to kind of shift out wide or to drop deep. It's having those kind of like Swiss Army knife type players is it's almost like it's a trademark of David Gray, isn't it? And just almost you can imagine him kind of having a bit of a free role like they've given to Martin Boyle, just sort of tailoring a position for them where it's there's less sort of focus on being disciplined and sticking to one particular role or one particular position. It's just kind of it's almost like a license to roam, if we're going to chuck in another cliche. But impressed by what he had to offer. Plenty of energy, plenty of running, eye for goal. And I think as well he's got bags of European experience as well. So I think that'll be that'll be beneficial come the second qualifying round and beyond.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like the very definition of a shrewd signing, which is always Indeed. The word people use. Always shrewd.
Yes.
We'll work our way back the way to Josh Mulligan. His first start at Easter Road as well. Played in the middle of the park alongside Dylan Levitt. With a bit more license to get forward and join the attack. And I was impressed. I thought he's looked good in the sort of more sort of bounce game feels, if you like, over in the Netherlands. This was just kind of first out and something that felt a bit more proper. And you can see why he was such an asset for Dundee. You can see why he's been an asset in various positions, because I think you look at him and you can see various qualities that translate well to either playing in the middle of the park or playing out wide. At the moment, he's playing in the middle, and he has done. I don't think he's featured. He didn't feature out wide at any point in any of the other friendlies. Not that I can, unless my memory's really letting me down. So I mean, at the moment, that's where David Gray's seen him. That could change over the course of the transfer window. We know Hibs are still looking at bringing back Nectar Triantis. They could end up exploring alternatives there. So midfield is something that's on the agenda. So it's not to say that he's going to get shunted out wide. It just might be a case of, that's the way the squad develops. But he can bring a lot in there, and I think he's a nice foil for Dylan Levitt in terms of, I'm not saying he's sort of like for like with Nectar Triantis, but I think there are some overlapping qualities in the sense that they're both really strong runners in and out of possession. They're physically strong. They can hold people off. You're not going to get sort of bullied off the ball. Mulligan, I think he's shown a decent passing range since he's come in. He had that really good pass for Hoilett in the game against Ajax. He had a couple of nice switches last night, and he breaks forward as well. He can get forward and join the attack. He's a bit like McGrath and like he's sort of perpetual motion. So again, it's kind of promising start for him, and he just looks sort of comfortable in the team already, which again is maybe comes back to a wee bit to what you're saying of, it's a guy who's played in this, he's played in Scotland. He's got, he had lots of appearances for such a young boy at Dundee. It's not going to be a complete culture shock for him coming to Hibs. And again, he looks pretty comfortable already, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean it's David Gray's big athletic boys, isn't it? It's and we were I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but when you look at the players who are coming in, you look at who he's playing. You look at this, Kieran Bowie, even players who maybe aren't sort of tall, like not saying they're like 6'4", 6'5", but they're just very physical, up for a battle. I think when you look at sort of even the likes of Chris Cadden, you sort of look at him and don't think sort of like big physical Chris Cadden, but he does have that. It's hard to get him off the ball. It's even Martin Boyle. I think you look at him. I mean, possibly one of the smallest players in the team, without height-wise, physically. But you try and get the ball off him, and it's difficult. It's tricky. So I think credit to the conditioning staff who've been kind of working with the players just to properly get their sort of especially their upper body strength up as well. But I think it's we've seen Hibs benefit from this kind of signing policy before, where you just think take players who know the league, who have experience in the league, and essentially just give them a platform to improve and say, look, you've been playing well, you're a standout in this team, come to us, we will help you improve even more. And I think it's really telling that Mulligan's been saying that I think he played 2 of the 3 games against Hibs last season for Dundee. And he was saying the thing that sort of stood out to him about Hibs, like even in that 4-1 game at Dens Park where Jordan Beat was sent off, he was saying you could see that Hibs were a good team, and that he sort of like really keen to be a part of something like that, and felt when Hibs did come calling and made quite a strong push to get him in. Sort of looking at it and thinking, yeah, this is where I can see myself playing. I think I suit that style of play. I think I'd fit in. And it's interesting because we had that from Nicky Cadden last season when he was out injured, saying that what he saw was a good team, and he was roundly ridiculed for it, and later vindicated, as we know. And it's interesting just to have opposition players from last season saying that as well. Jamie McGrath said it too. That you could see that togetherness, that team spirit, and just the way they played. We spoke to them in the Netherlands about playing in that 3-3 game against for his case against Hibs at Easter Road. That kind of turns Hibs season around, and even then he was just saying it was one of the craziest games he's played in, just in terms of that sheer kind of determination and will from Hibs not to lose it. So I think that's sort of quite good, and you've got players at other teams in the league who are saying, hang on a minute, I like that, I fancy that, I want some of that. It kind of makes I think it makes selling it a lot easier, the idea of coming to the club. But you can see exactly why my Mulligan would have stood out for the coaching staff and for Gray especially. Like he's got that physicality. He's good on the ball. At the moment, I mean, it's the sort of Nectar Triantis saga is ongoing. He's back in pre-season with Sunderland, and we'll wait and see how that pans out. But at the moment, it's. I mean, I remember saying that I thought, I thought Mulligan might be coming in to play right wing back. That we might end up seeing that if Triantis does come back. But at the moment, it does look very much as though he's sort of filling that Triantis role in the midfield, alongside Levitt, just that kind of doing a bit of the dirty work, doing a lot of the scrapping, and just letting Levitt kind of sit back and pick the passes. Although I did think a lot. I thought Levitt got quite stuck in yesterday as well. Something again that we maybe didn't see a lot of last season, but just I think you can. I think you can see what he brings to the team, Mulligan. I think for a lot of the comments from fans last night, seeing him in the flesh for the first time, and it's always the case that you find a player from another team and you're like, well, I don't really remember him, playing against our team last season. I don't remember him standing out, but you're so invested in watching your own team that you're not necessarily going to notice every opposition player and what they do, particularly if they're playing in a team with a different style of football, or they're playing in a sort of a different role or whatever. But I think probably more to come from him as well. About a good start, and I think it'll be interesting to see just how he kind of continues to impact the team, whether that's from that central role or whether it's from out wide.
Yeah, he had a good game. Kind of like what I've seen from him so far, and I think like McGrath, probably a lot more to come once he's sort of fully settled in. So I mean, the third of the debutants, Raphael Salinger in goal, his Easter Road first outing at Easter Road, played in the pre-season friendlies over in the Netherlands, but a first chance for fans to get a proper look at him. It was I mean, in the first half, I mean, from a goalkeeping perspective, he had kind of next to nothing to do. It was
a virtual spectator, yeah.
Yeah, the half that Hibs almost kind of totally dominated. But he did look comfortable, I think, playing the ball with his feet. Whether that was, helping Hibs play out, play out of their own 18-yard box, or when he had to go a wee bit longer as well. If they were, obviously, Hibs have that option with Kieran Bowie. If you need to go, if you're getting pressed high and you need to go over it, you can just clip it up towards him, and he'll fight for it. And I thought, accurate long range kicking as well. There was a couple he actually, he went long, but he didn't. They weren't lofted. He sort of just pinged it straight into towards Bowie's feet. I think there was one with Josh Campbell, I think, in the second half as well. So quite impressed with him from that perspective. And obviously, start of the second half, he went from having had absolutely nothing to do to having to pick the ball out the back of his net twice in the space of just a few minutes. I don't think anything he could do with the first goal, ball straight across his box, and it's finished from close range. I think he'll probably be disappointed with the second one a wee bit. It's a shot that's come from range. It's at his near post. He was kind of already over at that side. He did have kind of plenty of time, I feel, to see it coming. Just a wee bit kind of fractionally slow and getting down. But I think, sometimes you can, I think we generally give outfield players a pass sometimes for making mistakes in pre-season when they're still getting up to speed. But I think with goalkeepers, obviously, just by the nature of it, mistakes can always prove that wee bit more costly. So, I mean, I think it'd be a bit harsh to draw too much judgment from that. And then, but I mean, towards the end of the game, he had the penalty save to preserve Hibs' victory. And I actually thought the just in the moments before that, the Essen player was brought down for the penalty, but he still managed to get his shot away. And Salinger actually made a really good save to turn that. Uh-huh. He came out, sort of typically made himself big. I think he saved it with his right leg. That was probably, in some ways, maybe even more impressive than the penalty save. So, I mean, he kind of showed his, what he's all about from that perspective. What did you make of him?
Yeah, I thought he had some good moments. Fully agree with you on the second goal. I think that was a bad one to lose, whether it's a kind of lapse in concentration, whether it's a kind of, misjudgment on, how fast it's going or where it's going in the goal. But, I think you'd be expecting most keepers to save that one. So I think that was a little bit disappointing. There were a couple of times as well where the kicking, it was mostly good, but I felt there were a couple of times where, it was putting the team under pressure a little bit, or he was giving the ball away. But as you say, there is a kind of, tendency to say, we'll give him the pass because it is pre-season, get out of the system. It's his first time playing at Easter Road, so you don't know how that affects people. Is it just getting used to playing there? Is it getting used to surroundings, this, that, and the next thing? Penalty save was good, not the best penalty I've seen. Just to kind of take a little bit, not to take anything away from McGrath, but yeah, it wasn't a great penalty. You would think most keepers would be saving that. But yeah, you made a good point that he did actually. He made a very good save in the lead up to the penalty, which is almost certainly going to be kind of overshadowed by the fact that it was followed up by a penalty. But I think the big thing as well is that when you bring in a keeper from overseas who's had such a good season previously, we have no idea how well he did in the Austrian Bundesliga. Posted some very good stats in terms of saves made. We chatted to him during the training camp, and he was talking about sort of being good with the ball at his feet, and just talking about his stats. Even though Hartberg didn't have a great season overall individually, it was a bit of a standout campaign for himself. But I think because of last season, and I mean Hibs have this relationship with goalkeepers anyway. There have been some less than reliable custodians over the years, shall we say. There's also been some incredibly reliable custodians, but I think it's the ones that weren't stand out. And I think there is a little bit of that kind of, it's like a hangover effect, and it's almost like keepers coming in are sort of put under greater scrutiny, particularly because of last season. Joseph Bursic was brought in as the number one. Did okay in pre-season, but then the mistakes started to creep in during the league campaign, sort of culminating in that Dundee game, which was his last in a Hibs shirt. And I think there is probably a little bit of apprehension among the support. I mean, we know what Jordan Smith can do, but at the same time, you want somebody to come in who can kind of challenge him, sort of push him every day. Just that he'll do the same for the other goalkeepers. But it almost feels like with a view to the European games that Salinger obviously like a lot taller than Smith. There's sort of more of him, 6'5", I think, and I just wonder whether that's maybe kind of featured a little bit in the thinking that against some European teams that might have like big players in there, it might be useful to have a similarly sized keeper, and that's not to take anything away from Jordan Smith, who had an excellent season last year when he came in. Made some good saves in the pre-season games as well, especially against Duisburg, when they sort of came into the game more in the second half. But yeah, I think it's difficult because it's always you're playing against a team from Germany. They're not going to play the same way as a Scottish team. And you've got the European games coming up, so it's that sort of trying to sort of juggle that. The keeper getting used to what they're going to be facing on a regular basis, but also can they adapt for European games? So it wasn't one of those performances when you're looking at it and thinking, get Jordan Smith back in. But I think Salinger would probably say himself that he would have wanted to be a little bit more kind of assured in some moments. But as you say, it's pre-season. It's the best time to get out of your system. And I think the main thing is so long as he sort of works on that and then kind of stamps that out from in any future games, then I don't think there's anything to worry about. But I just think it'll be it'll be interesting just seeing him and Jordan Smith and how they kind of sort of battle for the number one jersey. I think I don't at the moment. I think it looks like Salinger's probably going to start the European games. Don't know that for certain. Could be wrong. But I think we'll get more of an idea from maybe the next couple of friendly matches before the Michelin game. But I just think that could be quite an intriguing battle, because Jordan Smith won't want to lose the gloves, but Salinger's got a point to prove. He really wants to get into that World Cup squad with Austria next season. I think he feels he has a good chance of doing it. So that'll just be kind of fascinating watching how that plays out with both keepers kind of pushing themselves. Ultimately, good for Hibs, but good for the individuals as well. So one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely, one to keep an eye on. But I think that's all we've got time for today. As I said, kind of really interesting pre-season friendly, not your usual summer kickabout. Sometimes these games can get a bit flat, but I think that one last night was anything but. And as we said at the top of the show, a lot of that was to do with the Rot-Weiss Essen fans. So, for there, folks, we're going to leave it there. We'll be back to speak to you again very soon. We'll have more reaction to last night's game coming up on the website, so do keep an eye out for that. We've got David Gray's full post-match press conference on the website and on our YouTube channel. He talks about taking off LU and Lewis Miller, what injuries both of those look. In the initial stages, they look precautionary. He touched a wee bit on transfers, and there was a wee question thrown in there about Nectar Triantis. He talked about him maybe still exploring his options as the summer goes on. So do check that out on the channel. All of that is in there and it's on the website as well. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, folks. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day and we'll speak to you again very soon. Cheers.